Hello, everybody, and welcome back into the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass podcast here on this Thursday, August 1st edition. It's August, ladies and gentlemen. You know what that means. Football is this month. Tonight, actually, if you're an NFL preseason junkie, Hall of Fame game going down tonight. But we got college football this month, and that's what we're going to talk about specifically on the Tennessee Volunteers side of things. I'm joined by Ryan Schumpert, Rick Butler. How you guys doing today?
Doing well. Not too fired up for the Hall of Fame game tonight. Never been a Hall of Fame game guy, especially not this year, as these two teams play each other in week 2. So they play in like 5 weeks of real time. So
Yeah.
for what's already a very dull game, I imagine it'll be all the blander tonight.
Rick, what's your take on preseason football, and how you doing on this Thursday?
Yeah, well, first off, it's good to see you guys once again. And Ryan, it was only just a mere couple hours ago that we were together at Tennessee football practice. So hello once again. I didn't even know the Hall of Fame game was going on tonight. It is never something that ends up on my radar, except for a situation like I think it was last year because they just finished their rookie season. If I remember correctly, Cedric Tillman was playing in the Hall of Fame game, I think, because
Browns,
that was
Jets.
a Tennessee connection. So unless there is a big Tennessee player who was drafted playing this game, which there were only 3 of them, so I don't think there is, I don't know if this game is going to fall on my radar. I've got a couple TV shows I'm finishing up tonight, or I'm finishing up soon, so I'd like to do that tonight. So I don't know if Hall of Fame game is going to be in my forecast.
Speaking of some NFL stuff, before we get into the real meaningful stuff, y'all see Colin Cowherd today?
About
Yes.
Joe.
Couldn't
I was going to
believe
Joe
it.
Milton. Yes, I was
Yes.
going to mention that later on. We can talk about it real quick right now. Y'all buying or selling this? Like,
Sell.
Yeah,
I mean,
sell.
I think we have to sell. There's just no way, right? There's just no way.
Selling for
Well,
75 cents.
Yeah, that's low stock. What I told a friend of mine earlier today was Colin Cowherd is officially now inducted into the preseason hype train, that media members have been lining up in for years now. I was part of it. I don't know if you guys will admit to it, but I was certainly part of it last year where I said to myself, you know what? There's some good reports coming out of camp. And you know what? I saw him make that throw earlier this morning. I think this could be it. So it wasn't, right? It just, I would like to officially induct Colin Cowherd into the media members who buy a little bit too much stock in Joe Milton during the preseason fan club, because that was kind of what that take screamed to me. Colin Cowherd just needs to ask the Tennessee fans, like Tennessee fans, and especially us who have been covering it. We've seen this for the last couple of years. So I think if anybody kind of understands the preseason expectations and the road to the season, it would be people like us.
Well, it was that was a big talking point earlier this year about the combine thing and how Joe's made for the combine, with his strength and big arm. It's made for that type of stuff. It's made for football activities that aren't the real game. And Joe Milton's a fine quarterback. He's going to be an NFL player. So he's obviously very good at the sport, but I just can't buy into the fact that he'd even potentially be starter week 1. Maybe he can beat Drake May out for the backup job like the first couple of weeks. Maybe Drake May's just having that awful of a camp. But Jacoby Brissett is definitely going to start over Joe Milton, no matter which way you slice it. Dude's a vet, and he's pretty all right.
Yeah, no, it's that aspect of it. One with he's going to start over Joe Milton if it came to that, and 2, it's just a reality of financials in professional sports. They was a number 3 overall pick they used on Drake May, 3 or 2,
Yeah.
3, right? Yeah, I mean you pick him number 3, he's gonna play over Joe Milton. I don't care if Joe Milton's better than him in practice. Drake May's gonna be the one that plays, and Colin Cowherd understands that too, which makes me think he's just playing for ratings and sound bites. But yeah, right. I do not see it.
It's funny about Cowherd though. He said that, right, and he also said today, just more of not Tennessee related at all, but about potential Brandon Ayuk deal announcement today. My dad, diehard Niner fan, wants the Niners to sign Ayuk, so I sent him that. I'm like, oh, maybe it's today. Maybe Brandon Ayuk gets paid. And he's like, oh, snap, but I'm also like, he also said Joe Milton could be QB1, so maybe we pump the brakes a little bit on if a Brandon Ayuk announcement's happening today. But hey, that's what training camp's all about. That's what preseason's all about, is getting people hyped up for the season. It's certainly from the media standpoint. So training camp has started. Fall camp has started for the Tennessee Volunteers. Started a couple of days ago. Tennessee's 2 practices in. Y'all went to media day on Tuesday. Ryan, I'll start with you. Any big takeaways from these first 2 practices? I know what you're seeing isn't, quite a whole lot, but just having 2 practices under your belt, hearing Hype talk, hearing Ablin talk today, anything that stuck out to you this week?
There's a handful of things, so I'll just hit the start on the little bit we did get to see. We got to watch maybe 30 minutes of practice on the first day on Wednesday. It's the most we'll get to watch all preseason, all year, I should say. And including that was, I don't know what, Rick, like 3 minutes probably of receivers versus DBs one-on-one. So just some level of competition. And Ethan Davis looked really good. I think he was 4-0 on his reps in those. A couple of them he beat. One of them I know was Jacoby Thomas. He beat badly on a in-breaking route. So he looked really good. He's the type of weapon. Again, I'm a little bit skeptical about how Tennessee ever using the tight ends a ton in the passing game, but he's the type of athlete that Tennessee has not had, type of pass catcher Tennessee's not had at tight end, and he's going to have a role this season. So I'm curious to see how that develops. Certainly a good first day for him. On the first day of camp, when they did routes on air, Ethan Davis worked with Nico Iamaleava, and that kind of first group today was Holden Stays. So that battle feels like it's neck and neck, and certainly Miles Kitselman is more well-equipped to earn some playing time than Tennessee's third tight ends have in recent years. So that, and then another guy who I thought had some good reps when we were out there was Jordan Matthews, who and feels like he's in the second team at corner behind Ricky Gibson and Jermon McCoy. But I think he won 2 or 3 one-on-ones when we were out there and made a couple of nice plays to not only have good coverage on maybe an inaccurate throw, but truly break up a pass. So I know, and then, the play everybody saw that Tennessee tweeted out from the first day of camp included him getting beat deep by Chris Brazell. So, maybe there's a bad play in there too. It's a good reminder of how little we see and how hard it is to draw major conclusions. But those were 2 things from the purely on the practice field that stood out to me the first 2 days we've been out there.
Yeah, I think, Ryan said a lot of great things there, and I spent half that time with my head down because I was taking a bunch of notes while he was talking, because I think he brought up a lot of the valid points there. And to kind of build off of one of those points, I think just from an overall standpoint, it's exciting to now see almost a new crop of Tennessee football players start to emerge into what we believe will be impactful and capable roles for this team. You look at the secondary, and certainly new pieces all over the place, whether they're guys who have been in the program for a couple of years now and they're just elevating up, or you're talking about some of those newcomers like a Jermon McCoy, who looks the part when you first see him on the field. He's coming into the program. What can those transfers do? So I think just from that standpoint, it's going to be exciting to watch these practices over the next couple of weeks. And again, our opinion, certainly we've seen a good bit so far, but it's only been 2 practices. So there's still a lot to see, but I'm excited to watch some of those new faces, or just players that have kind of been waiting in the shadows a little bit, see how their emergence starts to go throughout this training camp. I think you look at, again, I talked about the secondary a second ago. Andre Turrentine looks to be one of the emerging leaders of that group. A lot of older players left that position during the offseason, so he looks good. But Boo Carter looks like one of the young players that I'm excited to see go. So I think whether you're talking about a guy like Ethan Davis, whether you're talking about a guy like Boo Carter, whether you're talking about a guy like Chris Brazell, I think these are all new faces to the program that are going to have their chance to kind of rise up here in training camp. And that, to me, was one of the biggest takeaways over these first 2 days or so.
Ryan, you mentioned Jordan Matthews. It feels like Jermon McCoy, Ricky Gibson, like you said, are kind of the leaders in that room as far as who's going to get the most playing time, who's going to be the starters at corner. Do you think Jordan Matthews could compete for, seeing the most snaps of anyone off the bench? I know McMurray's there, the transfer. Do you think Matthews could be firmly in that mix of, top second team corner?
No doubt. Like I'd be hard pressed to find who else is even in the mix behind Jordan Matthews and Jalen McMurray. Like you got to maybe not scrape the bottom of the barrel, but you're going a lot further down with either like a true freshman like Caleb Beasley being in the mix, or maybe some like a versatile defensive back like a Christian Charles, who's played it in multiple spots, and Tim Banks said is going to start things off at safety here this camp. Though we did see him do a little bit of work with the corners too on Wednesday while we were on the practice field. So yeah, I would almost put him as the third corner at this point. But there'll be plenty of competition there. That's been a spot. Now, it's been a spot Tennessee's rotated at a pretty good bit under Heupel and under William Martinez. I think some of that's, a question of, did they rotate a lot because what we've talked about in the past, there wasn't a whole lot of difference between the first and the second team, or did they rotate a lot just because they felt like it was best and to keep guys fresh at that position? So I'll be curious to see that. Certainly, those second team guys are going to get opportunities over the course of the season, but I'll be curious to see if the discrepancy in snap count widens a little bit from the starters to backups. But certainly Matthews is, to me, I might pencil in as the third corner at this point.
Position battle we didn't really talk about a lot last week is left guard. Jackson Lampley competing Andre Carrick, Sham Umarov, Ryan, Rick. Either one of you can answer this. Did you make any notes of the left guard competition through the first 2 days of practice? Who's been getting more reps than another? Any notes there?
Yeah, I mean, they kind of do that. Yeah, you got it, Rick.
Go ahead.
They kind of do that tandem work with like two guys typically in a lot of the drills that we watch. And Andre Carrick was going through them first with Dane Davis beside him working at left tackle. I mean, I think that was probably the most notable thing where Zalen's hurt at left tackle at LSU. Transfer has been repping with the second team, also has a big knee brace on. So, kind of something to watch for. I don't think at this point I find it to be a big deal. Tennessee's done that a lot in the past, like when we're out at practice where they don't, for whatever reason, they don't have a lot of the transfers or any sort of question mark. They don't let them work with the first team while we're out there. I guess I think they might be tricking us on that. I don't know. We're not that smart, but I don't think we're that dumb either. So that's something to watch. And then Javonte Spraggins during the open portion of practice on Thursday was not out there, and Lampley was working at right guard besides John Campbell. So a little bit more Carrick at first team, but again, today, 50% of the practice we've watched, Lampley was also working with the first team just at a different spot. And that's the one, again, I just have a hard time thinking Tennessee won't rotate because it just doesn't feel like the difference in those two players is a whole lot.
Yeah, and I think they'll have opportunities to rotate that spot as well. But you're right. There has been a couple of positions on the field so far where you've seen maybe one of the more experienced Tennessee players taking up that first team spot. And you're right. That has just struck me here in these first 2 days of, hey, letting the veteran player sort of take those first two steps, let them kind of establish the standard, and then move some of those guys into that spot. You just talked about Zalen's Hurd kind of stepping into that left tackle spot while Dane Davis has it here in these first couple practices. I also look at the running back room for that. Cam Seldon in the non-contact jersey for Tennessee this week. Deshaun Bishop taking the 2 snaps. But there's a lot of talk right now about Peyton Lewis and sort of his rise into this program. He's a guy who sat out for spring practice with a shoulder injury, but there's a lot of buzz around his name right now. He could potentially be one of those guys that earns a spot up as well too. So there are a couple of positions like that have been fascinating to kind of watch unfold here in these first couple practices.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Fall camp will continue to roll on here in the next couple of weeks. Stay locked in on RockyTopInsider.com for all fall camp coverage, whether it's pressers, practice reports, what have you, video as well on the Rocky Top Insider YouTube page, where you can also watch us. Our podcast is video now, so this is the second iteration of that. Thrilled to have that aspect as part of the press pass here. Today, we're going to be talking superlatives. Last week, we filled in the blank. It was a lot of fun previewing the season that way. Today, we're going to do kind of a similar thing with some superlatives. Let's call it preseason superlatives, summer superlatives, what have you. But let's start with the offense. That's the most exciting side of the ball to talk about when you're talking about a Josh Heupel team. Rick, I'll start with you. Offensive player most likely to break out. Your superlative for that. What's your answer?
Well, I think that's a fascinating question. Obviously, just through the first couple of practices, a good bit of it still is sort of imaginatory of what they can do. So in my head, I kind of reworked the question a little bit into who is a good candidate to break out here during camp to then see what they can do out there on the field. And again, I just talked about him, so maybe I kind of spoiled my dinner a little bit with my last answer, but I like what Peyton Lewis can do. And I think just watching him out there in these last couple of days, he is a very smooth running back, but also getting to talk to him in the scrum style setting today. He's a mature guy. He understands why he's here. He understands the steps he needs to take, but he's also a guy who was here during the spring. He talked today about getting the mental part of it down. Obviously, you can't get all of it down just from the sideline, but he really worked hard to get that mental point down so that when this fall came, he could be able to step up and say, okay, I now know what I'm supposed to be doing. I now understand it. Now I've just got to go out there and do the physical part to it. Again, that's easier said than done. He's got to combine that together. But I just think there's opportunity for him as well. I think that as long as Cam Seldon is going to be in that red non-contact jersey, he's going to have chances. He's going to. Deshaun Bishop's going to. Khalifa Keith is going to. Well, we know what Dylan Sampson can do, and the Tennessee football team knows what Dylan Sampson can do. So obviously it's not a prove yourself kind of camp for him. I think if anything, they want to be able to make sure he's fresh heading into that season. So if you give me anybody who I think has the opportunity to break out here during training camp, maybe set themselves up in a good position for the regular season coming up, Peyton Lewis is a guy. Again, maybe it's a little bit of recency bias. We did talk to him today, and I just mentioned him, but he's been one of these guys that I've been thinking about here in this first week.
Ryan, you think there's a world to where week 6, week 7, Cam Seldon's healthy, all Tennessee's running backs are healthy, and Peyton Lewis is the second most effective running back for Tennessee?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a world because I think he has that type of ceiling and that type of talent. I don't necessarily think it's likely, just from the standpoint that he's new, and he talked about it a lot today. This is a new style of offense that he's running, and he came from a true I formation under center running attack in his high school in Virginia. So I would bank on Seldon. I think Seldon's just a solid player. If he's healthy, I have a hard time thinking it's not going to be him. But certainly Sampson's ceiling, which I think I talked about some last week when we talked about freshmen who we thought were most likely to have a role. I think his ceiling is so high. So with that in mind, I think, yes, certainly it's possible.
Yeah, and if I could add on to that as well, I think that, when you're talking about could he potentially move up to the 2, I agree with Ryan. I think it is in a world of possibilities. I don't think it's likely, but that's not as much to say about Peyton Lewis as to say that I do think that Cam Seldon is going to be good. Maybe they're a little bit, they're obviously going to be different types of backs. So I think you want to trust this coaching staff to be able to use them both effectively in the middle of a game if they can. But I agree. I think that Cam Seldon gives you a lot of opportunities to be versatile from the backfield. He was a wide receiver in high school. He was one of those athlete guys who Tennessee decided to start his career at the running back room. So he's still got a lot of wide receiver experience under his belt. I think they'll be able to use him out of the backfield in a lot of different ways. As maybe more of a power guy compared to Dylan Sampson. So, and again, we've seen in the past couple of years, Josh Heupel isn't afraid to run a 3-man running rotation with a freshman as that third back. So I think as long as health kind of stays at a good point in that running back room, they've all got an opportunity to make a mark in the game, depending on, what the depth chart kind of says or how the ordering goes on the field.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of an underrated, or at least part of the offense that's flying under the radar here in the preseason is Tennessee's rushing attack and just how great it was last year. I mean, Tennessee had one of the better running games in the SEC and, of course, one of the best backs in the league. And Jalen Wright and Small are gone, and Sampson, a little bit of a smaller guy, a little bit of a speedster, can catch passes, but it feels like for Tennessee's running back room to be more complete, Peyton Lewis needs to have a role. And you talked about the 3-headed monster with a freshman, how Heupel's incorporated that twice now in his tenure. I think it could certainly happen, but felt like in a lot of ways, Tennessee's run game saved its offense last year. And I don't think Tennessee is going to have to rely on the run this year because you have to buy into what Nico and this receiving core can do, but there probably doesn't need to be that big of a drop off.
No, I don't think so. And, when I don't feel like, kind of go to your last point you made, I don't feel like Peyton Lewis needs to step into that third role for Tennessee. I think certainly someone needs to, but I think if Seldon's healthy, I think the 1-2 can be good enough that you can get by with just like a fine piece, a capable, not playmaking piece at the third spot. And so while I think Peyton Lewis has the highest ceiling of that group of Deshaun Bishop and Khalifa Keith, it's maybe not a spot that it's a kind of a big if Seldon is healthy and out there and it's truly the third back, you might not have to truly lean on the guy that has the highest ceiling. And then just kind of going on Cam Seldon as a whole, to me, he's just such an intriguing player because of a lot of the things that Rick said, that he kind of moved around and played a bunch of different positions in high school, kind of a jack of all trades, master of none type of situation. So he's been at Tennessee for 1 year. He's such a big, strong guy. What you heard about him in high school was the speed, his track speed. He was a really good track runner. And then the fact that he did play receiver, and I think he's very comfortable catching the ball out of the backfield. So he just has a really diverse skill set, and I think is still kind of young to that position in a lot of ways that I don't know how much of that we see this year, but in the long term, I think it's it's hard not to be excited if he can learn a lot of the intangibles of the running back position, because he just has a lot of different things that he either already does well or should do really well when you just look at his size and athleticism. And I guess one thing to note, while he is out there in a red non-contact jersey, today, Thursday, Tennessee's quarterbacks and running backs were working on some kind of route tree stuff out of the backfield, and he was going through that. So a good sign for Selden early in camp.
Yeah, and one last thing on this, and I know that our running back tangents is now going long, so I'll keep it short. But, I also think that, it's not always about who you have in the room, or it's not just about who you have in the room, but it's also about how you use them. So I think obviously if we've learned anything from these past 3 years, is that the coaching staff is a very creative, innovative coaching staff. So I have no doubt that the pieces that they have in the room, they've been brought to Tennessee for specific reasons. Cam Selden was recruited to Tennessee for a specific reason, as was Peyton Lewis, Deshaun Bishop, whoever else you're talking about. But I do think between these three main guys, I think that they're absolutely going to have their ways to use them and have their ways to use them effectively. And obviously that's going to fluctuate throughout the season. There were times where Dylan Sampson didn't get a lot of touches last year, but I think they know how to use their guys in certain ways to make them effective. So certainly interested to seeing how they do that.
Ryan, I'll kick it over to you. Your breakout player on offense in the 2024 season is who?
It's got to be a receiver to me. I think it's no doubt a receiver. If Tennessee is going to have the improvement in the passing game that you talked about, Jack, which we think they will have with Nico at quarterback, who that receiver is, I can't say I have a whole lot of confidence. It feels like there's a lot of guys that are capable, and no guy that you just feel like's locked into a true starting spot or locked into. You're like, yeah, he's got a great rapport with Nico. Squirrel White would be the guy you said, yeah, he was good last year. He could be on the cusp. I wonder how high the ceiling is just with his size.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'll go Dante Thornton. Rick, you're talking about offseason hype and people falling into it with Joe Milton every year.
Yeah.
Everybody fell into the Dante Thornton hype train last year. It's not churning quite as fast this year, probably because Chris Brazell and obviously the fact
that the Brazell hype train has definitely taken some.
Yeah, there's a new toy.
There's a new toy, and Thornton was probably one of the more disappointing players on Tennessee's team last year when you talk about preseason expectations and what they actually did. But we said it earlier this offseason. He was better to me when he moved out wide. It felt like just the experiment with him in the slot was a major, massive failure. And he was starting to make some strides out wide. I think the talent is there. I think Jack, you said it on our last podcast, the second year receiver in the system. We saw it be big with Jalen Hyatt. Certainly Squirrel White proved that in some regards last year. I think it could be a big year for Dante Thornton. And again, I kind of say that without a ton of confidence, but he's a guy that does feel like maybe is flying a bit under the radar.
Yeah, and of course with Thornton too, even if he's not starting, if it's Brew, Brazell, and Squirrel, week one, it's going to be tough to lean on Brew McCoy so much this season because he had a catastrophic injury last year. It's not like he is just going to be Brew McCoy of 2022, if not a little bit better, because he's a couple more years in the Heupel system. That injury was pretty significant last year, so I think Tennessee's going to rely a little bit on Dante if it takes Brew a little bit to get all the way back, if he even can get all the way back. Because you guys saw the injury last year, so I think Dante's a really important player for this offense's upside. If he underwhelms again, I don't think it's far from the end of the world as long as Chris Brazell can be good. But yeah, I feel like Tennessee's going to ask Dante to do more earlier this season than they did last season. And he's certainly one of the most important players on this offense, and he would be my answer too. Just it feels a little bit basic, but if you saw the potential last year, and if everything can work out, he could be poised for a big season.
For sure, and I think Brew is such an interesting case for Tennessee for a lot of the same things you just ironed out. Like, I think his recovery is going really well. He's out there in the normal, I say normal pads. They don't really have pads on, but he's got a helmet on and he's got a normal white jersey, not a non-contact jersey.
He's working with the team.
Yeah, he's been a partial participant in routes on air. He didn't do anything on Wednesday. He did some of it, not all of it on Thursday. So, I think Brew McCoy's going to be back for the start of the season, which is quite the accomplishment.
Yeah, he's going to play, but I'm just saying.
That's what I'm saying. I completely agree with your point that it's hard to think that he's going to be. be hitting the ground running either from off an injury like that. And in a spot where Tennessee has so many different options, how much is it? All right, let's keep Brew in there. Let's get him back up to speed. Let's get him back to 100%. Get him as many reps or a lot of reps to try to force feed him. And how much of it is, all right, let's give some other guys some opportunities because we have other guys in this room we think are capable. I think that's going to be a really fascinating dynamic when Tennessee gets into the season. That on a topic that we and just about everybody else who covers Tennessee football has discussed a lot this offseason at a position where Tennessee has traditionally not rotated much with Josh Heupel and his staff.
Rick, anything to add on Dante?
Yeah, I do want to save a lot of my receiver thoughts because I think it's going to be an answer to one of the next questions that we have coming up later on. But I do agree with the idea that, hey, Dante Thornton in his second year of the program, it's no longer an excuse. And I do think that an excuse is calling it, that's a harsh term for it. I can't think of the right one just off the top of my head right now. But I do think he had the legitimate reasoning of, hey, it's a hard offense to pick up in your first year. There's a lot that goes into it. Plus, he had the injury that kind of ended the season early. So I do think that those were valid things that went into that first year. But that narrative is gone now, right? He's now in his second year with the program. He understands things. And I think that Tennessee is going to have a better quarterback getting them the ball too. So I think that now kind of the time is now for Dante Thornton to step up and show what he can do.
Last really barely over 2 games he played because he got hurt against Missouri. Last season had 6 catches for 135 yards and a touchdown in those last, like I said, 2.1 games, if you want to call it. So he was hitting his stride there when he got hurt. So we'll see if Thornton can kind of pick up where he left off in a little bit of ways there early last November this season. Let's move to the defensive side of the ball. Ryan, I'll start with you this time. Your superlative answer for defensive breakout.
My cautious answer is Arian Carter, because I just think he's going to have a big role. There's just no doubt about it. He's going to play a ton of snaps for Tennessee. I think he's a talented player. Do either of y'all have Arian Carter?
No, but I had his linebacking counterpart,
okay.
Jeremiah Telander.
Okay.
As one of my potentials.
I'll talk a little bit more. Jack, you have
I'm going to go a different direction. So you can have
No, because I got someone else I want to talk more about.
Oh, okay. I was going to listen.
Okay, he's going to
pivot Ryan because you pivot Ryan because I was honestly going to say a linebacker, whether it was Carter or Telander, and then y'all had each of them. So
you talk,
pivot.
Jack. You talk about Arian Carter later. Davian Hobbs is to me the less
your breakout
for my breakout. I think he's so talented. I think he looks so much more complete and filled out as a player in his second year. He's a former 5-star recruit. It's more uncertain because you just don't know how many reps he's going to get because Tennessee has a lot of depth on the defensive line, whereas at linebacker, Arian Carter is going to be force-fed a ton of reps. So I liked what I've heard about Davian Hobbs in the spring. I think he had a really good spring, and I think he's a guy that when you talk about Tennessee's defensive line, James Pierce is a stud. There's some young edge rushers that have stud capabilities, and it feels like a lot of in the interior spots, a lot of guys that are really solid. I think Hobbs is the guy that of those even strong side defensive end, defensive tackle, nose guard spot, those 3 spots on Tennessee's defensive line, I think he has the highest ceiling of anyone. So I'll bet on him to have a big year.
I think that is a fantastic answer. I think that is on the money.
Thanks, Rick.
Before the podcast, I was putting together a rundown and I sent it to Ryan and Rick, and I had like 6 superlatives on it. And we were also going to do fall camp. Ryan's like, dude, this is too much. And he was right. But 2 other questions I had were sleepers, and I cut those from the rundown. It really felt like Peyton Lewis would almost qualify as a sleeper as well. He's a freshman. And David Hobbs, I feel like, is also could qualify as a sleeper. So you guys killing 2 birds with 1 stone is great here. I love this answer. The defensive line is loaded. He's an interior guy. So Elijah Simmons really has never manifested to become a big-time player for Tennessee. He's dealt a lot with injuries. Omar Norman-Lott, got to love what you saw last year. Of course, Amari Thomas, Brian Eason leading the pack there. But do you think David Hobbs can find his way into a lot of playing time in this loaded group here, Ryan?
Yeah, I think so, just because of the nature of the position, and there's a lot of rotation in the interior defensive line. So I think he's almost certainly going to be a guy that gets like at least close to his floor to me, feels like 20 snaps a game. And if you start the season like that, I think that just gives him the capability to play into being a bigger role and playing into a guy that maybe gets 40 snaps a game, and you can look at as a real difference maker on the defensive line. And, I wonder can he push for a role in the pass rush package too? It feels, it was last year Tennessee had Roman Harrison, James Pierce is on the edge, Omar Norman-Lott, and Tyler Barron on the inside. You feel like Omar Norman-Lott is probably on there again. To me, it doesn't feel like there's a definite strong side defensive end that you slide into that other defensive tackle spot for the pass rush. Maybe it's Tyree West, maybe it's Dominique Bailey. Does Davian Hobbs, being a little bit of a more slender, or at least maybe less slender, but a real quick defensive tackle, could he be a guy that fills that role too? And certainly if you're going to be out there in pass rushing downs with the amount of emphasis James Pierce is going to get for opponents, you're going to have opportunities. So I guess a roundabout way to answer your question, I just think he's going to get opportunities, and with his talent, I think he's going to play his way into more consistent playing time and more snaps as the season goes on.
Well, you mentioned the pass rush package. We saw it in the Virginia game when Pierce just absolutely ate. We were expecting Josh Josephs to be in that role with Roman Harrison. It was James Pierce who won that job and then flourished, of course. So it feels like Josh Josephs is going to be getting some reps with James Pierce on the other side. I think I like Josh Josephs to kind of, come into his own a little bit this season. Everybody's kind of forgot about him. He was hyped up a lot last year, but I think the potential is obviously still there. He's not going to start, but it's still there from the Leo spot. But yeah, David Hobbs, maybe he's that guy in that pass rush package, what have you, that surprises us this year. Rick, anything to add? And you can go ahead and talk about your player if not.
Yeah, no, nothing really to add there. I think those are all good thoughts. I had already mentioned T-Lander as a guy who I just think, man, he looks like a guy who's locked in. When he was at media day, and they had about 5 or 6 different players spread out on the line. He had those sleeves rolled up, right?
Big strong guy.
He was looking there like this and just answering the questions. I mean, he looks like a football player that's just locked in to play the sport. So I think he's probably a violent, angry guy out there on the football field. And I think that being in his second year will help him take a step up. I do have an answer of Jermon McCoy, but I don't really think that answer is in the spirit of the question. I think the question is more of, Jermon McCoy, he's going to be a breakout player because he didn't play at Tennessee last year, right? So people are now going to understand who he is for the first time. Again, I don't really feel like that's the spirit of the question, but I do feel like he's a legitimate answer. Jack, I'm going to go with the guy that you were just talking about for a quick second, and that's Josh Josephs. He's a guy that, Ryan, we haven't gotten to talk to yet at camp, and so we haven't heard directly from him, but he's a guy who's been mentioned a lot at camp so far. He's been mentioned by Josh Heupel. He's been mentioned by Tim Banks. He's been mentioned by some of the players, and it sounds like he's really taken it upon himself to say, hey, you know what? I believe that I can be a great player, but it's going to take everything coming together in order to get me there. Josh Heupel had a good quote the other day, and I'm going to kind of butcher it right now, but he said something along the lines of, the growth of the player directly parlays into, the growth of the person directly parlays into the growth of the player. I think that can't be said more true than anybody than Josh Joseph. So eager to see what he looks like in a full speed setting. Obviously, you guys are right. The elephant in the room is James Pierce Jr. is the number, whatever top 5 overall draft pick, probably of next year's draft. So he is going to be the starter. He is going to be the dominant player. But if Josh Josephs can come in and give Tennessee a similar level of effort to where there's not a lot of drop-off once you get James Pierce Jr. maybe off the field for a quick breather or in a certain situation, if you can make it to a point where there's not a lot of drop-off, I think that just, again, makes Tennessee's defense even more dangerous because we know that they like to get after the quarterback. So I think that Josh Josephs is, again, a player who has seen some good reps before in game, who has obviously seen a player kind of jump him into that breakout star. But I think from everything we've heard in these first 48, 72 hours or so, it sounds like he's a guy that's putting in a lot more attention to detail as he gets prepared for this season. So those are kind of the 3 guys that were on my radar.
I mean,
yeah, no, I completely agree with the Josh Josephs one. And that was someone I was going to bring up in the first, part of it, talking about fall camp to this date, and we just didn't get to it. One thing, and you hit on, I think, all the most important stuff. One thing I'm curious to see, something that I think it was Josh Heupel talked about on Wednesday, was how much bigger he is.
Yeah.
Mike, is he big? My question would be, is he big enough to get some reps at the strong side defensive end spot? Because I think ceiling isn't quite, he doesn't quite have that 6'5" quick twitch, long arms, pure pass rush mold. Not that he can't rush the passer. I just think he's a little bit more balanced of a player. And Tennessee does have so many of those guys. I mean, Caleb Herring, Jordan Ross for a true freshman who didn't get here until June at that position looks extremely well put together. So Tennessee just has so much talent at that spot, at that Leo spot. I wonder if Josephs is capable of sliding over and playing a little bit of strong side defense end. That'll be something I'll be watching for at least.
I think that's a good. I think that's a good point. And again, just for context sake, the Tennessee spring or fall roster has him listed at 6'3", 245 pounds, and he's a player who did not change his number, which is becoming more and more increasingly appreciated as I go through this more often. So thank you, Josh Josephs, for staying at number 19, 245 pounds of you.
Yeah, and Squirrel White definitely disputes this entire thing, but I feel like, freshmen always have numbers that are likely to change when they have a bigger role as sophomores, but it really feels like that sophomore season when you get your number, you typically don't change it after that. As I said, Squirrel did, which was a surprise. But yeah.
Well, what's annoying about Squirrel's change is that Mike Matthews took number 10. So you're still going to have a very speedy, quick, maybe a little bit smaller than the defense guy kind of running around. He's going to look like Squirrel sometimes if you're just kind of glancing over. Oh, who got that? And you forget. So it's tough when the number stays in the position group as well.
Yep.
Yeah, and going back to Josh Josephs, I mean, if he's getting strong side reps, if he and Pierce are both on the field just in pass rush packages, Pierce is going to get so much attention. I mean,
he got an opportunity there.
Tennessee had just the ultimate, leverage, I guess, or gift of him being a secret last year and a surprise. No one saw James Pierce coming. This year, everyone's seeing him coming. He's getting so much buzz. I mean, even number 1 overall in some mocks. So he's going to get so much attention. Josh Josephs could feast potentially on the other side. And when he's on the field, same time as Pierce, may not happen a whole lot, but when it does, it's going to be a sight to see. I think because Joseph still was a big recruit for Tennessee, just as big as James Pierce was. I think on some sites he was even higher ranked. But yeah, the potential for this pass rush, for this defensive line is incredible for Tennessee, and it could be one of the best in the SEC, if not the best.
Yeah, 100%. It's probably definitely on defense, probably behind quarterback, the single best position that Tennessee's recruited at since Josh Heupel's been there. It's every class. It feels like they've had 1 or 2 just top 100 guys at that spot, and you're seeing it kind of manifest, and a lot of those guys fully develop into the player, that Tennessee envisioned and people envisioned coming out of high school.
Josh Heupel, by the way, when somebody had asked him about the Leo position, I don't think it was today. I think it was yesterday. Oh, he didn't talk today, so it had to have been yesterday. He did. Somebody was, I believe it was Eric Kane. He was listing off some of the Leo players that Tennessee had lately. Josh Heupel went out of his way to add Byron Young to that list. Byron Young, who's obviously a phenom right now as one of the younger players in the NFL. So Tennessee's got a lot of talent that they point to, and I think those recruits, again, speaking with Jordan Ross yesterday, he saw that. He understood that, hey, Tennessee's a place where we're developing and good edge rushers are going to right now, and so I think that kind of all works together.
Yeah, it was Adam Sparks, but that was a funny moment.
Oh, thank you.
Moment from Heupel.
By the way, I didn't mention it, but I love Rick's analysis of walking into media day. I see Jeremiah Taylor, like, that guy's gonna cause problems this year. Like, you already know.
It was the sleeveless, man. It was the sleeve. I mean, he rolled them up himself, so you knew he wanted to show something off. So you could just tell that he was ready to hit something. He was ready to hit one of us.
Hey, maybe he and Blake Burke can get together with Ryan Schumpert. Inside joke there. But let's move on. Just talk pass rush. I don't think that's a great pass rush this year is going to surprise anybody. But Rick, a position group that's most likely to surprise everybody this year is what?
Well, let me see what I wrote down. It's a group that we've talked about for a minute already, so I won't stay too long, but I think this is a real opportunity for the wide receivers to live up to the talent that they have on paper collectively. When you look at the players that they have, you look at Squirrel White, you know what he can do. Obviously, the 2 guys that they brought in, Dante Thornton comes back for a second year. He was a little bit more slow to get going last year. Is Chris Brazzell going to go through that same sort of kind of learning curve in his first season? I think it's obviously a possibility. This is a hard offense to pick up from everything that we've heard. And then we know what Brew McCoy can do despite him coming back from injury. He is a big-bodied, a sure-handed wide receiver that can make big plays in big moments. You go back to that Alabama game for evidence of that. You see, and then some of the other guys that I'm not even mentioning here in this top 4, but Mike Matthews, a phenomenal recruit that maybe they can figure out a way to work him in. We've heard good things about Chaz Nimrod. He's been working from the slot here in these first 2 days. I just think that with better quarterback play, and I think that that is something that Tennessee will have this year with Nico, with a very strengthened offensive line, adding Zalance Hurd into that mix. Tennessee's, the edges of Tennessee's lines are going to be covered. We already know what the interior with Javonte Spraggins and Cooper Mays can do. I think that Tennessee's passing offense is absolutely set up for success. But I think that these wide receivers, again, collectively, they live up to the talent that they have individually on the paper. They're all very talented players. They're all very highly touted recruits. We know what they can do. But last year, it didn't always combine together to make for a successful product in that room. So I think despite, the injuries that are coming back from, I think despite Chris Brazel's newness to the program, I think this is a real opportunity for Tennessee's wide receivers to live up to the expectations, again, collectively, that they've had individually on paper.
Ryan, we can talk about the depth of this receiver room all we want, and it's great, and it's probably the deepest since Heupel's been here. But maybe not my beef, but what I keep going back to with this receiver room is there going to be a guy that other teams just absolutely fear? Is there going to be a guy that really helps Nico have a great sophomore season? Or are they all going to be really good and it's about 5 deep, but no one's just a stud? And Nico's going to have to be probably better than what the consensus would be or what you'd even expect him to be in a sophomore season to make this passing game one of the best in the league.
Completely with you. I've been saying it since literally our first podcast after the season ended, and we were talking about positions and need for Tennessee in the portal. And I said Tennessee needs to go out there and get an absolute dude. And maybe Chris Brazel's that guy. Certainly, it's a possibility, but it's not by any means a sure thing either. So I'm completely with you. To me, that remains the big question mark. One of the big question marks on Tennessee's offense as a whole is, just how good can it be? Because I don't think any of us would sit here and say we think Joe Milton was very good last year, but I also think the receivers didn't do him any favors either over the course of the season. And, a lot of the same guys back. Certainly Mermel Keaton, I think, had the most disappointing year. Brew McCoy's injury didn't do anybody any favors. Squirrel White's kind of the one guy I think that had a truly good season last year. But that continues to be a question. And when you get to watch 15, 20 minutes of practice every day, there's not going to be anything that I see until the season starts. And until Tennessee arrives in Charlotte week 2, they couldn't, really answer that question for me.
I don't know if you guys had seen it, but there was that clip floating around. I guess it was from Hard Knocks from the Giants, and it was Brian Daboll on draft day or somewhere around draft day. And he said that on his way into the building that day, he had gotten a call from Nick Saban, and he just basically asked Nick Saban, hey, who out of this draft class gave you problems? And Saban said 2 skill players. One of them was Malik Neighbors at LSU, and the other one was Brock Bowers at Georgia. Obviously, we're talking about 2 top 10 draft picks here, and that's a very high standard to get to. But Tennessee didn't have one of those guys. That was just a known problem to other teams in the league. And maybe it didn't need to be, a called out known problem by Nick Saban. But again, they didn't have that true number one that you just knew. Jalen Hyatt in 2022, I would imagine that that's a guy that Nick Saban would have called a problem during that game and during that season. So That's a guy that Tennessee is looking for. And I think, again, if Tennessee wants to truly elevate this offense and get it where they want to, especially with the passing game, one of those guys has to step up into a role. I think you can be productive with 4 to 5 really good guys, but man, it just makes that much more a world of difference when you can't have one guy who's just truly elite that is going to step up and make big plays when maybe things might not be going your way all the time.
Yeah, I almost think it has to be Dante or Brazel because I just don't know if it can be Brew.
They have the makeup for it, for sure.
Given the injury. I don't know if it can be Squirrel. We kind of know what he is at this point. He's very solid. Deep cut guys, maybe Mike Matthews can just be a complete dog as a freshman, but I mentioned it last week. Heupel just feeding him playing time doesn't feel like a likelihood in his freshman season. So it feels like it's either going to be Thornton or Brazel. If there's going to be a guy who can just be one of the better wideouts in the SEC, it would be one of those 2.
Yeah, and Mike Matthews has been limited the first 2 days of practice. So that also, to your point, Jack, about playing as a freshman, no more optimism really being inspired by the fact that
not
he's
the quickest start
time.
to his fall run.
Yeah.
Ryan, what is the position group most likely to surprise us all this year?
I'll give you two. Let's start at cornerback room. I talked a lot about it last week, and I'm just higher on this group, and I think there is still a lot of overwhelming negativity in the Tennessee fan base about Tennessee's secondary, and I think some of that's fair. I'm not all that optimistic about the safety position this season, but I just think the talent level at the top is better at cornerback, and I think, I think last year when Kamal Hadden was healthy, Kamal Hadden and Gabe Jeudy-Lally were a really good combination, at least in pass coverage, but obviously Hadden misses the whole back half of the season with the dislocated shoulder, so I think the ceiling could be higher for that group than it's been the last couple of years with Ricky Gibson, with Jermon McCoy, who's Rick's talked about some, with Jordan Matthews, who I talked about a little bit earlier, who has had at least had a nice first day at camp. A second group I'll give you, glass half empty, the group that's going to surprise people in the wrong way.
Okay, I like it. Let's hear it.
I can see the offensive line. The offensive line has so many veteran guys that it's been in most of these superlative rankings, preseason rankings for the top groups in the SEC. They're almost top 5 in all of them, and I get why. They returned 3 starters. Cooper Mays is an all SEC level guy. I think Javonte Spraggins is probably one of the more, at least from a national standpoint or SEC standpoint, one of the more underrated players on this Tennessee team. But I see a lot of questions at the tackle spots. John Campbell was an average player last year who missed about 4 games. Zalance Hurd, certainly his ceiling's incredibly high, but he's played very, very little football in the SEC. So you're banking on a guy there to start at left tackle who's a true sophomore. And then the depth is just, to me, this group, for us to sit here at the end of the season and say, all right, this group was really surprised with how they struggled, it would be because guys got injured. And I just don't think Tennessee, Dane Davis is Tennessee's third offensive tackle. He's certainly playable, but not a high-level SEC player. The fourth offensive tackle, it's going to have to be someone who is a young player that really, really steps up. And then you just go across the board. We mentioned Lance Hurd already, maybe a little bit banged up at the start of camp. We know Cooper Mays has had injury problems. Andres Carrick, I worry less about the left guard spot just because, again, there's Lampley too, but Carrick missed almost all last season with an injury. John Campbell missed 4 games with an injury. There's not a lot of depth at that spot, and there's a lot of guys that have had injury past. If you have a couple of those things stack up, I think you could be looking around and saying, how did people think this was going to be? Or it's crazy this was a projected top 5 group in the SEC.
5, 6, 7. I'm sorry, I'm counting 9 players, 9 offensive linemen for Tennessee are either true freshmen or redshirt freshmen. So there's a lot of youth there, but that's also a lot of inexperience. And if there are injuries, some of those guys are going to have to see the playing time, whether it's Sham Umarov, whether it's Bustle, whether it's Fyson Lang. And it really, last year down the stretch was the best example of any of Tennessee's offensive line not being able to stay healthy, and all those guys return. But Cooper Mays' injury bug has bit him quite a bit. Campbell and Spraggins got banged up at the end of last year. It feels like for Tennessee to be really good this year and to really make Nico's life not crazy hard, they have to be healthy. And that could honestly be the biggest swing for this team as a whole. It could be the difference in a couple wins, is if the offensive line can stay healthy.
Yeah, we saw Nico use his legs in the Citrus Bowl last year, and he was effective at times and certainly found his way into the end zone, but he had to. And he also said during his media day interview, he spoke for longer than Josh Heupel on Tuesday, which is fascinating to think about in hindsight. He said, look, I'm a pocket passer. Don't get me wrong. I can use my legs, and I will when I have to. That's one of the things that he's been talking with the coaching staff about. But he said, look, I'm a passer. I want to sit there, and I want to throw the ball down the field. So I think you're right. It's a fascinating thought brought up.
Yeah, I like the answer, Ryan. And, going back to corner, we talked about it a lot last week. Check it out if you want on the Fill in the Blank show. But, it's much unknown in the secondary as a whole, and really at the corner spot with Ricky Gibson starting as a sophomore, Jamal McCoy coming in from Oregon State. Feels like Ricky Gibson could have a great season and be a true lockdown corner, and Jamal McCoy, coming from a great defensive system at Oregon State, coming to Tennessee, could be right there with Ricky Gibson as being a really good corner. beyond that, it's hard to see any of those corners having just a truly great year and becoming big time players for Tennessee. But if those guys can be, dudes in the back end, and Rick mentioning Andre Turrentine at the top of the show, this Tennessee secondary could be sneaky good. But it also could be, the sore eye of Tennessee's defense and maybe team as a whole. So a lot of variance there with that position.
Yeah, and that's why I singled out corner specifically, because I really don't have a ton of optimism about Tennessee's safety spot. I think it was kind of surprising what they did or didn't do, I guess, in the portal. I mean, they go out and get Jacoby Thomas, who I think by some of the advanced analytics and stuff was a slightly above average starter in Conference USA last year. So it's hard for me to think he's going to make some huge impact. The star spot, I think Tennessee could be good at with Jordan Thomas and Boo Carter. Or maybe whoever doesn't win that job ends up getting some safety reps too. I think it would probably be Thomas, more likely than Carter. That would be a lot to ask of a true freshman. But the cornerback spot, I see the high ceiling. I don't really see that as much in safety.
Some scheduled talk to end the show here. Last superlative will do. Rick, I'll start with you again because I started with Ryan so much last week. But if you're looking at the schedule, the one game that is most likely to be tougher than expected, or that everyone's expecting it to be heading into the season, is going to be what?
Yeah, I think that this question is interesting for a couple of different reasons. I think on one hand, Tennessee's schedule to me kind of shakes out as there's a couple of tough games, and then the rest are games that Tennessee should win, right? And so I'm trying to think in that category of games that Tennessee should win. Arkansas is going to be on the road, but Arkansas is going to be a really bad team in the SEC. Florida is going to be in Neyland Stadium. Mississippi State, I believe, is going to be in Neyland Stadium. Kentucky is going to be in Neyland Stadium. So, none of those games, terrify me right now because of those things. So I don't really know yet. I think that I probably could have a better answer for you a little bit later on as these training camps go by. We start to hear about, maybe who's surprising with other teams in the league. But I guess we're going to have to go over to my other category of tough games and just say that the North Carolina State game. And I think that people understand that is a challenging game, but it's one where it's a neutral site. It's one where their fans can get to easily as well. It's going to be a top 25 matchup, I believe. So I think that North Carolina State, I don't know if people are sleeping on it, but they shouldn't. But as far as the other games go in that other category, I don't really see one that I can confidently sit here and say it's going to be tougher. But we'll see how spring camp, shakes out for some of them.
Well, I have one, but I know Ryan's answer is NC State. It has to be.
No, it's not NC State.
It is not?
I was going to say Ryan's answer for us not picking them last week would have been NC State. We picked up.
I had you as in Sharpie on that.
Rick is right. NC State people aren't taking NC State seriously enough, but I did my whole shebang about NC State on the podcast last week. So there's another one I feel that way, or a very clear, because Rick's right. There's a really interesting dichotomy in Tennessee's SEC schedule, and that you look at the preseason rankings. Tennessee plays 2 of the teams predicted to finish in the top 3, and 5 of the bottom 6. So there's just not a whole lot of games in that middle. However, Stephen A. Smith voice. However, Florida. It's Florida, yes. It's Florida, it's Florida, it's Florida. First of all, and I'm telling you, Tennessee fans this, Tennessee's terrible against Florida. They always are. They never play well against Florida. It's pulling teeth for them to win that game. It's a minor miracle to win that game. It feels like. 2, I think people are lower on Florida a lot because of the schedule. The Florida schedule, I don't think Florida's great. I think they're mid probably on the whole, where a lot of these other teams on Tennessee's schedule, I just don't think are very good. So much of the negativity and skepticism around Florida is Billy Napier's been bad for 2 years. The schedule's so hard. It's just hard to see them having another good year. I don't necessarily think the team itself is terrible. And Graham Mertz, I think, is a pretty underrated quarterback. He was solid in his first year. And Graham Mertz was not a problem for Tennessee last year. Certainly carved up Tennessee and really was not the problem.
Better than expected.
100% better than expected. So a second year in an offensive coach's system, I could see him making some improvements. And to me, when you get away from the 4 games, the 3 games, I guess, that everybody has circled in Oklahoma, Alabama, Georgia, it's North Carolina State that I think most people, like Rick said, do have an eye on because it's going to be a top 25 matchup and it's going to be the first big game of the year. The other one to me is clearly Florida, that I think is by far the next most losable game for Tennessee on their schedule.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with this. And last year, it's kind of weird because I was telling
You
everyone
were
to not
pounding
worry
the
about
drum.
Florida
Yeah.
but
you
the
had good
discourse
reasons.
around Florida, yeah, because I did not think Mertz was going to have a good season. He exceeded my expectations, and then I really dug at my heels after they got dogged by Utah week 1. I mean, that was just glorious because I
Yeah.
looked so right.
Yeah.
And then when
And
Tennessee
Tennessee
got
didn't do
dogged in
you any
Gainesville,
favors in
I
your
looked so
prediction
wrong.
either.
Right, but this year it's not flipped because people weren't necessarily high on Florida, but people were still worried about Florida last year. And granted, the game's on the road, so you're going to be more worried, and the history that goes into Tennessee and Gainesville. But even just as a whole, it felt people were higher on Florida last year. And the only thing, and right as Ryan said, the only reason they're so low on Florida is the schedule. And if you just look at the roster, they're much better than a Mississippi State, than an Arkansas. Florida at Tennessee, the home game against Florida is definitely harder than one of those lower tier road games Tennessee has. So it's the answer for this. And, a team playing with nothing to lose is dangerous. And it kind of feels like Florida is that this year. I think they still have bowl game aspirations, obviously. And most media pundits would say if Florida doesn't make a bowl game, it's still a disappointment, even though a lot of them are projecting Florida to finish with 4 wins. If Florida doesn't make a bowl game, that's still a disappointment. But when you look at the early part of their schedule, they'll beat Samford. They should beat Miss State on the road. If not, then maybe the Florida game for Tennessee shouldn't be a worry. But if they lose to Miami and A&M, they're looking at 3-2, probably at best entering that Tennessee game. That's going to be a big game for them and for Billy Napier, who's obviously had success against Tennessee. So, or last year anyway. But I don't know. It just feels like that's a game people are kind of not talking about a lot and chalking up to an easy win just because it's in Neyland, but Florida is a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, it's one that I think it's interesting from like the Tennessee fan side of it, Tennessee fan base side of it, where no one nationally is talking. I mean, I think nationally most people are talking that it as a win for Tennessee, and I think it's not a game that you circle for Tennessee. But I know when that week rolls around, Tennessee can be. They'll have played 5 games? Yeah, they'll have played 5 games at that point in season. Tennessee could be 5-0, and Tennessee fans will be worried about that game that week.
Yeah,
just because of the nature of the beast. And I mean, even 2 years ago, they do win that game, but they were up. Was it 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter? And I think 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, and it ended up came down to the final play of the game. It just never feels like Tennessee ever makes it easy in that game. And even in that game, Billy Napier's offense gave Tennessee a lot of issues in that game. That game felt like it was whatever offense would blink first was the one that was going to lose. And that the biggest play of that game, in my opinion, is when Amari Thomas stripped the ball down in the third quarter in the red zone. Both teams were going back and forth, scoring touchdowns basically every possession. And that was when Tennessee went from up 7 to up 14. They really flipped the game on that play. But all that to say, Tennessee's defense has really struggled against Florida's offenses.
Yeah, I don't believe what I'm about to say, honestly. But I could hear out an argument for this in that the Florida game is almost a little bit more important than the Oklahoma game. And you're going to say that's crazy. And I get that. But if Tennessee were to lose in Norman, Tennessee gets a bye after that, and then a road game against Arkansas, which I believe to be a gimme. If Tennessee loses to Oklahoma, the Vols have to beat Alabama to make the CFP because they're just not winning in Athens. So the Florida game is just an absolute must win. And if Tennessee beats Oklahoma, you don't want to lose to Florida and then have a hangover for the Alabama game. You want to be going into the Alabama game as high as you can be. So it almost feels like Florida is sneakily one of the most important games on the schedule, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I see. I mean, it's just always, to me, the balance when you're ranking most important games is there's like the biggest games, the most true toss-ups, and then there's those games that a team is favored to win, but it's like not a lock at all. And it's like, well, if you don't win the games that you're favored to win and it's not a lock, then those other games don't even matter. Like you got to win those games too. So I see the argument of it for sure.
And for all those saying that a potential road game is harder for Tennessee, Nico doesn't really think so, because sound of the week, a little new segment maybe we'll incorporate here, very short to end the show here, but Nico likes playing on the road more than at home.
I definitely love road games more than home games. I don't want to upset, our Neyland fans. I love playing in Neyland Stadium, but I feel like, away games, I just feel like all the odds are against you. Gives you a little more, just gives you a little bit more, that feeling that you get. Yeah, you can say focus. I think there's plenty of other words that you can use, but going on the road is something I've always loved to do since a young age. So.
The word I think he was looking for there was juice. That's what I thought in the moment when that press conference was going on. I was like, I don't think it's as much focus. Like, I think he's just hype. Like, I think he's just like, you feel the juice. So I think that's the word he was looking for there. It's a great video, by the way, for whoever
is recording it. Shout out.
I don't know who it was, but they did a great job. I'll use this as that video. I'll use this as my final thought because it was something I was going to maybe touch on in the first segment, but didn't get around to it. Nico, much more comfortable talking to the media, which isn't a huge surprise than a year ago. Just seems very loose, confident in himself, confident in his role on the team. And a lot of that makes sense. He's to start. It's his second year. It's his starting quarterback. I think maybe just as big a takeaway I had was Joey Halsley and Josh Heupel did not do anything to stoke the flames of Nico Iamaleava hype when they talked to the media on Tuesday to open up fall camp. They both said the expectations are really high for the level that he's going to play at this season. And maybe for Halsley, that's not a massive surprise because he's not a slave to coach speak, but Josh Heupel kind of is a slave to coach speak into not hyping anybody up. I mean, I'm sure Josh Heupel said nice things about James Pierce last preseason when specifically asked about James Pierce. There was nothing that Josh Heupel alluded to make anyone think what was coming for James Pierce last season. So for Heupel to not only just kind of give cookie cutter positive answers about Nico, but to say our expectations are for him to play at a really high level, I think a quiet confidence from Tennessee's head coach and his quarterback entering fall camp.
Yeah, and by the way, I can't believe we've gone over 60 minutes of this podcast without really ever bringing up Nico. Maybe that's how we should lead next week's podcast because there are a lot of people that are interested. I think, at least for me, I can get the sense that the Tennessee fan base, it's not just like, I don't know, not just like insane, unknown hype anymore. I feel like Tennessee fans are a little bit more grounded and they believe he's going to be great. But let's talk a little bit more about his performance next week after we get a full week of watching him. But just for starters, he has, in my opinion, I think he's looked really good these first 2 days. So things going about on track as you'd expect. But it is interesting that we really haven't talked about Tennessee's star quarterback once through these 60 minutes.
People get plenty of Nico content everywhere. This is a Rock Top Insider Press Fest. You guys are in the mud. We're in the weeds here. People aren't coming to us for treetop Nico content. But I digress.
Jack,
anyway, yeah, go ahead.
I would like to, you mentioned earlier we're doing this video podcast. I know it's going to wrap up here in a couple minutes. This one's been long, as I imagine they will be during fall camp. Just so much to get into. One thing I want to do to incentivize the video podcast is just at the very end of every podcast, and I don't want this to go more than 10, 15 seconds, but I see this shelf behind you, and I see that there's a lot of action figures on this shelf, and I don't have a good view of it. Obviously, it's blurry. Obviously, it's small, but I want to try to guess one per week. And just see if I can get it right.
One per week?
Based on, just see if I can get it right. I think that the 6'1" on the bottom row in the white pants, I think that's the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. Am I correct?
You are correct. Yes,
Thank
you are correct.
1 for 1.
Dude, you
see
could go
next week.
Dude, you could go 16 for 16 on these.
That's what I'm saying. I think I'm going to get every single one over time. But in case anyone wants to go see what we're talking about, and you can look over Jack's shoulder.
I like it. I like
go to the video podcast and see it.
Gonna have to put my laptop on mute for the end of the podcast every week.
You are,
Brian. Your hatred
you couldn't get any,
dude.
Yeah, it's a coward move.
No, I proudly couldn't get any.
No, you wish you could.
WWE is so over the top. Like, yes, I don't watch. I don't watch Raw every week. I was more of a fan when I was a kid, but come on, the WWE in itself, like it's cool.
No,
like,
his hatred is
it's so deep for no reason.
Manufactured. No, it's manufactured. It's
okay. Rick's not.
He does hate it. He hates it, but to the point that he just wouldn't say anything about it. If if I didn't love it, if Jack wasn't a big fan,
100%.
he wouldn't ever recognize it. Like it's not anything that could possibly appear on his daily radar. But considering the fact that he knows that we as adults take it seriously. Now he's going in on it, right? Now he's sharpening his knives each night. He's been combative of it instead of just, I'm not even going to pretend that it exists. Am I right?
Yeah, no, that's 100% accurate. I didn't give WWE any thought for years before I knew Rick, because it was such a I didn't know anyone older than the age of 8 liked it.
My God!
Then I had to go. Rick, I have a
multi-billion-dollar business.
I have a really good story joke WWE related with Rick, but we're already at an hour and 4 minutes, and as it appears, we're gonna have to talk about this every week at the end of the pod. I'll save it for another time. So,
all right.
But yes, Rick's whole assessment there was correct.
Next week, we'll hear the wrestling story from Ryan. Rick will guess another wrestler, and we'll end the show with WWE talk. By the way, WWE Nostalgia Instagram account, best follow there is on Instagram. Dude, my feed is flooded with that stuff just because I engage with it so much. Sending it to my brother. Some of the best parts of my day watching that stuff. Getting all the feels back when I was a 9-year-old. Just absolutely loving Jeff Hardy.
I'm not talking about it here. This isn't me. You can't put this one on me. I didn't.
Now,
this one's
Rick,
not on
let's
me.
let's not pretend we are the same, because I don't keep up with it really anymore. You do a little bit, so we do
not
differ.
A little bit. It's priority viewing every single week for Rick.
Hey, this Saturday
night,
Jack, I'll see you at my house. You can come watch SummerSlam. Biggest party of the summer.
I'll be mocking.
Let's get out of here.
I gotta reach my 12 mock drafts a day count.
Viewers are plummeting right now,
dude. I gotta reach my 12 mock drafts a day count. So I'm booked every night until August 31st. No, I'm just kidding. But if you want to follow Rick Butler, WWE fan, that's at Rick Butler. Brian Schumpert is at rshump00. If you want to follow him, that's STHUMP. I'm at Jack Foster Media, and Rock Top Insider at Rock Top Insider on socials. For the YouTube audience, thank you for watching. If you're listening on Apple or on Spotify, appreciate you as well. We'll see you next week.